Welcome to the Explainer. So when you think of grand strategy games, you probably picture careful planning, right? Meticulous resource management, brilliant tactical maneuvers unfolding over centuries, a master tactician thoughtfully moving pieces on a giant map. But what happens when the carefully constructed mechanics of a historical simulator completely buckle under the weight of their own complexity? Like, what happens when strategy just evolves into unmitigated, highly entertaining chaos? Well, we're about to break down a beautifully disastrous sequence of events from Europa Universalis 4, or EU4, that perfectly captures this exact phenomenon. We're going to map out exactly how a game about building an empire can so quickly turn into a desperate, messy struggle just to keep the wheels from falling off the wagon. Okay, let's dive right into this. We're back. Nothing has been learned, nothing has been fixed. Boom. That drops us directly into the madness, and it perfectly sets the stage for what we're about to analyze. Now, in a normal strategic environment, you learn from your mistakes, don't you? You fix the vulnerabilities in your defenses, you stabilize your economy, but the scenario we're looking at today absolutely rejects that premise. It's an environment where the player is returning to a state of total disorder, fully embracing the fact that absolutely zero progress has been made. It's this incredibly bold admission of failure that somehow is being worn like a badge of honor.
So, let's get things off with Phase 1, Strategic Blunders and Rebellions.
Now, when you're running a country, your military is your primary tool for survival. But what the source material reveals here is a situation where the military and the state's strategic decision-making have completely detached from reality. We aren't just talking about losing a battle. We are talking about decisions that defy basic arithmetic and common sense. Take Poland in this scenario, 5. That is the total number of wars Poland is currently engaged in. And the context here is absolutely vital. Poland is actively being invaded by 4 different countries at the exact same time. They're completely surrounded. A rational strategist would consolidate their forces, sue for peace, beg for alliances, literally anything else. So what is Poland's response to being invaded by 4 countries? They declare war on a 5th one. As our source notes, this isn't strategy anymore. This is just showing off. It's a total breakdown of strategic self-preservation. And if you think that's bad, consider the mathematical absurdity happening over in France. Picture this. On one hand, you have the entire standing French army. That's the professional military force of one of the most powerful nations in the game. On the other, you have a domestic rebellion currently forming within their borders that technically outnumbers them. Think about the logistics of that for a second. More people have organized to overthrow the government than the government has actually employed to protect itself. It's a complete inversion of power dynamics. So how exactly does leadership handle a crisis where the rebels massively outnumber the military? Hope. Yep, that is it. That is the entire strategy. In the game, you usually rely on your advisors to give you actionable intelligence, right? Or at least some modifiers to help you win. But here, the king's official plan, pulled directly from the advisor's tooltip, is literally just the word hope. When the game's own user interface gives up on giving you tactical advice and just tells you to cross your fingers, you know for a fact you have officially crossed the event horizon into pure, unadulterated chaos. Which brings us to Phase 2, Money and Monarchs. Because why just fail on the battlefield when you can fail at the bank too? In these types of games, your economy fuels your empire and your monarch dictates your efficiency. But as you'll see, the mechanics governing wealth and succession can be pushed to absolutely ridiculous extremes. And this brilliantly illustrates the economic absurdity I'm talking about. Venice is somehow generating more income through sheer merchant spam than 3 separate empires combined. The map is just a chaotic mess of arrows pointing unimaginable wealth directly into their coffers. And honestly, the best part, this hyper-economy is built entirely on shipping spices that literally nobody even asked for. It's an absolute masterclass in exploiting the game's trade mechanics until they snap. But hey, all that money can't buy competence. 8. That is the age of the distant cousin who just inherited the throne. The previous king died with absolutely 0 heirs, plunging the whole nation into a succession crisis. And according to the source material, this child possesses the administrative, diplomatic, and military stats of a golden retriever. You have an empire fighting massive wars, dealing with unprecedented rebellions, and the guy nominally in charge of navigating this crisis is an 8-year-old whose greatest geopolitical skill is fetching a tennis ball. As the narrator puts it, Godspeed, little king. All right, moving right along to a fascinating turning point in our explainer, Phase 3, the Wrath of Randomness. Up until now, you could kind of argue that player choices, like declaring a 5th war or spamming merchants, contributed to the chaos. But at a certain point, the game engine itself basically becomes sentient and actively starts turning against you. When you break down the causes of sailor deaths over the last decade, you'd obviously expect actual enemy nations to be the primary cause of casualties. Instead, the weather itself proved to be a way more lethal adversary. The entire navy sailed directly into a storm and half the ships sank instantly. Not a single cannon was fired by an enemy. It's this incredibly comedic naval disaster that perfectly highlights how random environmental factors can just instantly wipe out decades of careful military buildup. And the randomness isn't just destructive, it's deeply, deeply absurd. The game autonomously generated a pop-up event offering the player the chance to name their newest ship Bodie McBoatface. Now, it's crucial to understand that the player didn't create this option or install a mod for this. The game's own code just throw this bizarre internet culture reference at the player completely out of nowhere. And of course, faced with the overwhelming majesty of such a ridiculous flavor text event, the player accepted it immediately. No hesitation. So, what does this all mean? Who is actually in control here? When you play a strategy game, the whole fantasy is that you are the mastermind pulling all the strings. But when an 8-year-old inherits your throne, when the weather eats your armada, and when the game starts naming your ships for you, that fantasy totally shatters. It really makes you wonder if the player is actually driving the narrative, or if they're just a helpless passenger trapped in a highly volatile timeline. And that loss of control reaches its absolute peak with this situation. The nation's war exhaustion basically broke the interface. The bar is completely red and overflowing.
And because they're so exhausted, the citizens are staging a massive rebellion. But here is the ultimate contradiction. The war they are exhausted by, the war they are actively rebelling against, the player has technically already won it twice. But because of how the game's mechanics are clashing, the citizens don't know that. Nobody told them. And as the source points out, nobody is going to tell them. The system is so fundamentally broken that the population is literally revolting against their own victory.
Which brings us to our final phase of the analysis. Phase 4. Why we actually love the chaos. So if this game is so broken, so punishing, and so wildly unpredictable, why do people play it? Why endure the 5 front wars, the golden retriever kings, and the catastrophic hurricanes? The answer is the emergent storytelling. It's the very fact that things go so spectacularly wrong that makes the whole experience captivating. You literally cannot script a scenario where your citizens revolt against a war you already won, while your newest ship, Bodie McBoatface, sinks in a storm. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly by this final quote. Still no plan, still no mercy, somehow still winning. Despite a total lack of strategic foresight, despite the game offering absolutely zero mercy, the player is miraculously surviving. The nation hasn't collapsed yet. The sheer resilience required to keep the empire afloat when every single system is working against you is just deeply satisfying. It transforms the game from a dry simulator into a chaotic survival experience. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. If a game actively tries to ruin your plans, are you a grand strategist or just a survivor of chaos? The events we've unpacked today really suggest that true mastery of these complex games isn't about perfectly executing some flawless plan. It's about your ability to adapt when the game throws a mathematically impossible rebellion right at your door. It's about finding the humor when your empire is burning and holding on just long enough to see what ridiculous thing happens next. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a whole new appreciation for the beautiful disaster that is emergent gameplay.